Good evening and welcome to the Edinburgh International Conference Centre. My name is Lindsay Rafferty and I am part of the Specialist Associations team here at the EICC who are putting on this wonderful event for you all. I'm delighted to welcome you to The Art of Asking Questions, a talk brought to you by the EICC and the David Hume Institute. This evening is part of our EICC Live series of free public talks designed to enhance our commitment to community engagement, knowledge exchange, education and inspiration. Since its launch in 2019, we have hosted talks on a wide range of topics, including the future of healthcare, sports, robotics and neurodiversity, to name a few. These lectures speak to our vision, which is to create an environment which inspires ideas that change the world. So tonight, I'm particularly pleased that this event is once again in partnership with the David Hume Institute. They believe in the power of diversity of thought and the value of bringing people together in an atmosphere of respectful debate. By listening to voices from across society, especially in these times, I believe their aims and values speak perfectly to ours. Ideas that change the world are often curated through curious, inclusive, independent, and open conversation. And today especially, I'm sure we have a lot of questions collectively. However, in this context, I would encourage you to listen to our speaker and question how this evening can help you elevate your skills to better achieve outcomes in facilitation, negotiation, mediation in all aspects of your life. Can you apply these skills in your own environment? Who knows, maybe you could change your world or even the world. So before handing you over to our speakers, a little housekeeping. There are no planned fire alarms this evening, so if the alarm does sound, please look for the signs and exit the building as quickly as possible. For those of you on social media who would like to amplify this conversation, I would encourage you to share your thoughts and post with the hashtag EICCLive. So let's get started. I would like to welcome to the stage our host for this evening, Claire English, journalist, events host, podcaster, and communications consultant. Thank you, Claire.
Thanks, Lindsay. Thank you very much, Lindsay. Lovely to see you all here. Can you do me a favour? I want to take a photo, yeah? I want to record the moment, so can you all smile? I'm going to make sure you smile. I'm not sure how much of this I'm going to get in, but it's going to be a little bit weird, but yeah, let's go for it. Okay, everybody say cheese. Cheese. Okay, fantastic. Right. I've done that, Susan. That's one off the list. Here we go. Lovely to have you here in the EICC, a fantastic venue where many, many fascinating talks and conversations have taken place over the years. And of course, this is a special relationship with the David Hume Institute, working with the Conference Centre to bring you this event, because they love to explore big ideas and have excellent communication and conversations. I think you're going to get that tonight. We are absolutely delighted that you're joining us in this dank, kind of miserable November evening. What a time to be alive, everyone, yeah? Not much happening in the world. Not much need for asking good questions or getting a bit of a spin on that. So can I also say to you, if you want to clutch up nearer to your neighbours, it might be quite useful. I'm not going to tell you why, but it would be lovely and cosy as well. So if there's a big gulf between the people maybe here and on the wings, if you could very kindly move into the centre bit, that might make more sense. Could you do that for me? That would be great. Thank you so much. I know you've just got comfortable as well. Now, my name is Claire English. I used to ask a lot of questions for the BBC and for television and radio for 3 years, or 3 decades rather. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing our speakers' thoughts and getting some good tips as well, always learning. John Sturrock Casey may be known to quite a few of you already. I'm pretty sure he is. He's a man with many strings to his bow. The founder and senior mediator for Core Solutions, John spent much of his career exploring how to ask questions in all kinds of settings, whether as an advocate in his former job at the Scottish Bar, or as a mediator, a facilitator, negotiation advisor in the worlds of business, politics, policy, and sport. John is also a trainer in questioning skills for members of each of the UK's parliaments. And he even makes time to have a life. He is a father, a spouse, and a friend. And tonight he's going to show us how the ability to ask great questions can make a real difference to everything we do, especially in tricky situations in our work and even at home. So listen up, but first, give it up for John Sturrock. Please come to the stage, John.
Thank you. Well, first of all, my thanks to Claire for that warm introduction, to Lindsay for her introduction, to Susan and the David Hume Institute for the invitation to be involved in this event. Do you know this, folks? I've always secretly had the fantasy of doing a gig in the EICC, and here we are. And thank you all for coming. To reflect on the art of asking questions. And there is really only one question to ask today, isn't there? We should just acknowledge and face up to it right now. What happens now? What an extraordinary day this is in human history, very possibly. But there's another question that we should ask underneath the perhaps superficial, and it's this. Why did it happen? How did we get to where we've got to? And I hope I say that in a politically neutral way, although my tone of voice may indicate a certain colouring towards what I think. And maybe tonight there's an opportunity as we reflect on other topics just to have in the back of our mind what has happened overnight in the United States of America and what is happening elsewhere, and why it is important for us to ask not only the what questions, but the why questions and the how questions. My first question for you, however, is why are you here? Because some of you could be in the Usher Hall. In fact, some of you are going to the Usher Hall, I understand, to see the legendary musician Bob Dylan. So thank you for those of you who have chosen to come here rather than to go there. But the question I have for you is, why are you here, really? Rhetorical question, perhaps, but just think about it. And what will you do to make sure that you benefit from your participation in this evening? What specifically will you do to make sure that you benefit from this evening? Now, this is a slightly interactive event, so I'm going to invite you just now, please, to do something which is the reason why Susan asked you to compress yourself a little bit. What I'd like you to do is to find somebody close to you, your neighbour if possible, or get as close to the person as you can next to you, and just ask these two questions of each other. Sit in a pair, and one of you can ask the questions, first of all, why are you here really? And what specifically will you do to make sure you benefit? And then rotate, and the initial questioner can become the respondent. Will you do that? A bit of interactivity just to start off, and get you involved and committed to the evening. Hopefully, for some of you at least, that's got you thinking just a little bit more at this early part of the presentation. The question I ask myself is, why am I here? Why am I here, really? Or perhaps the most simple question, why me? So let me say a little bit about my journey, if I may, which perhaps gets me to the place where I am this evening in front of you. Claire mentioned my previous career as an advocate at the Scottish Bar. And in that role, of course, the job of the advocate very often is to examine witnesses and elicit evidence from them. This is a photograph of an edition of what's called the Scots Law Times from 1993. The Scots Law Times, for those of you who are not familiar, is a journal of record. It reports cases that have been decided in the courts in Scotland. Within this volume, there's a case of Raymond against Ahmed. And there's an opinion delivered by the judge, one Lord Penrose. And in that opinion, he says this of some of the questions that were asked. The form of questioning was such as to deprive the answers of any value. I was the questioner. And it was humiliating, frankly, for them to actually put that in writing and then for it to be recorded and be there for posterity is something I'm rather ashamed of. However, what it demonstrated to me at the time was how little I understood about the art of asking questions. It was not long after that that I took it upon myself to make a journey around the world to learn how advocacy was being taught elsewhere, how advocacy skills were being encouraged in Canada, America, Australia and New Zealand. This is a photograph of the University of North Carolina, where I undertook a 5-day course on advocacy skills, courtroom advocacy skills, and learned, believe it or not, for the first time, the real difference between an open and a closed question. I remember how traumatic it was for me to be given feedback about the inadequacy of the questioning skills that I had at that time. But that took me on a journey, because I came back to Edinburgh and to my colleagues at the Faculty of Advocates, the Scottish Bar, and I proposed to them that we set up a programme for advocacy skills training. For 400 years, nobody had actually ever trained members of the bar in how to go about their business. We just learned by osmosis and by observation of others. And so we instigated in the Scottish Bar what became, for a period of time, a world-leading advocacy programme. At the very heart of that programme was how to ask questions. Because, of course, that's what advocates need to do day in, day out in their courtroom function. And there's a picture of some of the judges who are now in the Court of Session or the High Court bench. Many of them went through the advocacy programme that we instigated, where asking questions lay at the heart of what we were learning. Shortly afterwards, I had the privilege of going off to Harvard to learn about negotiation at the feet of one Professor Roger Fisher, the co-author of what is recognised as the seminal work on negotiation, Getting to Yes. And in that quite different experience, I learned that as a negotiator, one needed to be able to ask really good questions. It wasn't just about asserting your position and telling the other party what it was that you wanted. You had to be able to really understand and elicit information from others with whom you were collaborating and negotiating. And in due course, that then took me to a completely different career, 22, 23 years ago, where I left the practice of law and began my second career as a mediator. And as a mediator, absolutely at the heart of what I do is asking questions. I remember early days in mediation, so I had my A4 sheet with my mind map, with all the particular types of open questions that I might need to ask the various parties as I went about my business of trying to find out and help them to discover what the case or the dispute was all about. I was very privileged that the journey took me to quite a significant involvement in the run-up to the 2012 London Olympics and Paralympics. I worked with the triathletes, the equestrian people, some of the sailing folks. And again, at the heart of that work, which involved mediating, coaching and training, lay effective questioning techniques. And then at the time of the 2014 independence referendum, some of us got together and we formed Collaborative Scotland. And we did it with a particular purpose, and that was to say, it's all very well having a binary question, a yes-no question about whether or not Scotland should be independent, but what lies behind that? What are the real questions that we should be asking? And I'll come back and touch on that later again, if I may. And over the years, I've also had the privilege, as Claire mentioned, to work with all of the parliaments and assemblies in the UK, including the Channel Islands, on effective questioning techniques for scrutiny purposes. And just I'll come to that now. Just in the past few weeks, I've had 3 visits to Stormont and have been working, I've worked so far, I think, with 8 of their statutory committees, helping the members of the Northern Ireland Assembly to refine their questioning skills for the important work that they do in committees when they're scrutinising and investigating policies which witnesses appear before them to talk about. And that's been a real privilege. I'll just flip back to the slide I skipped over, because in 2019, again, questioning was right at the fore when I was asked by the Cabinet Secretary for Health to conduct a review of allegations of bullying and harassment in NHS Highland. And I spent several weeks listening to, I think it was nearly 200 individuals who had experienced in some way, shape or form bullying and harassment. And my job was almost only and simply to ask questions, to find out what had happened, what was going on, how it had affected them, and of course what might be done to do things differently in the future. So more perhaps on some of that later. So what am I hoping to achieve today? Again, another somewhat rhetorical question, I suppose, I posed to myself. Well, many years ago, when my wife and I arrived at Auckland Airport in New Zealand, I think I was working with the performance, high-level performance team in Auckland or whatever, UK, their sport, New Zealand sport. This poster welcomed us in the arrivals lounge world-class performance in all conditions. Now, it's obviously an advert for an Audi Quattro, but that really struck me, because what I was seeing with world-class athletes and sports people was the ability to perform under pressure, when the chips are really down. And what interests me is how we can all do exactly that. That's perform under pressure when the chips are down, to be operating at an excellent world-class level, if at all possible. So that's one of my aspirations this evening, is to share some of the ideas that would help us all to at least enhance our skills, to work in the margins, because to say the difference between those who are world-class and those who are minimally competent lies in those margins. It's the little things that make a difference. And tonight is about a lot of little things in some ways. And here's an example from the Olympics again, the quadruple sculls team, the men's quadruple sculls team in Paris just a few weeks ago, winning that race by the merest fraction, I don't know, a millimetre or whatever it was. And that's what it took. That was the difference between, for them, gold and silver. Success, I suppose, relative failure. So tonight I'm going to offer a scattering of nuggets, lots of ideas. They won't all work for all of you, and that's fine. But what I hope you might do is get your metaphorical kit bag onto your shoulder and go away tonight with 2 or 3 ideas, 2 or 3 techniques perhaps, 2 or 3 thoughts that might help you to be even more effective, maybe even world-class in what you do, whatever it might be in the days ahead. And with that in mind, perhaps you would like just to take a current example of a difficult situation that you have. Maybe something at home or something at work. Something that's currently perhaps causing you difficulty, or something that's maybe recently been a problem for you. Just have that in mind as we explore, as I explore the concepts, if you like, the theory of all of this, so that you can apply that in a practical sense. And ask yourselves, as we go along through this, what world-class questions might you ask in the situation which may be causing you a little bit of difficulty at the moment. The notepad suggests you might want to even jot some things down as you go along. That's a matter for you. Quick word about the slides. I've got a lot of slides. That's how I work. It's how I give myself a framework within which to work. Don't try to digest them all. We'll make the best of the slides available through the David Hume Institute after this. Yeah, just maybe if you take notes of what seems important to you rather than perhaps what appears on the slide. Anyway, it's a whistle-stop tour, folks, so let's get on board, shall we? I'll speed up and I'll slow down and we'll see how we get on. So the first question that we should probably address is, why do we ask questions? Well, a number of folk have offered a view about this. So Tony Robbins, one of the great management gurus, certainly maybe of previous years more than now, said this: successful people ask better questions, and as a result, they get better answers. So that's a good start. Thomas Berger, who is a novelist, an American novelist, said that the art and science of asking questions is the source of all knowledge. Makes it seem worthwhile. And Carl Jung, the psychotherapist, said the ability to ask questions is the greatest resource in learning the truth. So there we have it. Better answers, knowledge, and learning the truth. That's why we ask questions. That's why we want to be even better in the art of asking questions if we can be. Albert Einstein said this: if I had an hour to solve a problem and my life depended on the solution, I would spend the first 55 minutes determining the proper question to ask. For once I know the proper question, I would solve the problem in less than 5 minutes. Just think about that, what that means in terms of preparation and thoughtfulness in advance of the conversation or the event for which the preparation is being done. He also said this, quite simply: the important thing is not to stop questioning. Funny, he said, the more I ask questions, the more I find out. And he was brilliant already. Richard Rohr, my favourite theologian, a man of profound wisdom and learning, puts it this way. Thus, he said, it was called a quest. Seeking the right question, unlike today's insistence on the right answer. Again, think about that, how much of our focus is on solutions and outcomes and providing answers. Actually, it's about finding the right question. Johnny Nash, this is a cultural reference, 1972 or 3, reggae singer. There are more questions than answers. And another cultural reference, Voltaire said, judge a man, note the misogyny, judge a man by his questions rather than by his answers. All pointing us to the importance of questions. One of my heroes, mentors, and good friends in the field of mediation and conflict resolution is Kenneth Cloak. And that's Ken there. And he, in his most recent book, The Magic in Mediation, writes, there are two primary reasons for asking questions. The first, of course, is to find answers. The second is to find deeper questions. Deeper questions. We'll talk a little bit, as the presentation unfolds, about the importance of getting under the surface. Remember that question about Trump. Not only what's happened, but why has it happened? What's going on under the surface that we need to understand? And again, another helpful piece of learning for me, particularly as a mediator, is that I don't need to find the answers. It's not for me to provide the answers to help other people. And I'm going to suggest to you also that very often when you are feeling pressed or compelled to provide a solution, maybe you don't need to. William Ury, my other big hero in the world of mediation and negotiation and the co-author of that seminal book, Getting to Yes, writes in his most recent book, we just need to be curious, listen carefully, and ask questions that can open up new possibilities. Let others work it out for themselves. Use questions to encourage your colleagues, your friends, your negotiating partners, your collaborators, even those with whom you disagree. Use questions to help them to work it out. It's much richer, much more likely to stick, much more likely to be something that will work for all concerned. We've also got to be mindful that we operate with millions of bits of information coming in every moment. You've probably been flooded with that just at this time. And so our brains are wired to filter in information and filter out. We delete, we distort, or we ignore altogether a lot of the information that's presented to us. And we tend to have just one view of things. However, it's important to know, particularly in a complex, volatile, uncertain world, that there are usually several sides, maybe to all stories. It just depends where you're standing or where you start from. Depends on your perspective. When I am a mediator or following my mediator pursuit, I will often at the start of the day get a flip chart out. And on the flip chart, I will draw a piece of cheese. And beside the piece of cheese, I'll draw three figures. And I'll say, look, if I'm in the top left-hand there, I see a triangle, slightly dark yellow. On the bottom left, it's a square, lighter yellow. And over here on the right-hand side, it's completely different, a white, pockmarked rectangle. It's one set of facts, but three completely different pictures or vantage points or perspectives depending upon the viewpoint. And of course, each viewer thinks they're right, and they are right from their perspective or their vantage point, but they're not wholly right. The danger, of course, is that we think that we are right and only we are right. The danger of the single story. That's a lovely TED talk which I commend to you. One of our jobs, therefore, is to get round the other side of the cheese or help others to get round the other side of the cheese and see what they see and see the different perspective on the world. So cleaning our filter, remembering that things are not always what they seem or what we may think. The importance of looking again, review to look again. And that's where questions help us and help other people and help us to help other people to see another perspective and to check the assumptions that we so often make about things because of the way our minds are wired. We jump to conclusions. It's a confirmation bias, for example. Actually, all the other unconscious biases which our brains are geared to utilize to help us to cope with the world day in, day out. We know so much now about neuroscience, the way the brain works. And about all this stuff, folks, I have this on my wall in my study, the Cognitive Bias Codex. Literally, probably 200 different mental shortcuts, heuristics they call it in the jargon, that the brain uses to cope with a surfeit of information. But the trouble with that is that it often leads us into error. And this reminds us, too, of Daniel Kahneman's work, the Nobel Prize winner for economics, although he's a psychologist, in fact, and his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, in which he tells us that we have essentially two parts to our brain. System 2 is the thoughtful, constructive, objective, way of thinking, which allows us to stand back and see multiple truths, if you like. And system one, the reactive, survivalist, instinctive, intuitive part of our brains, which operate 90% of the time. Great when we're doing everyday tasks, and great when we're presented with something which is dangerous or fearful to us, but damaging if it intrudes into our processing of complex and difficult issues. And one of the things that occurred to me just overnight, actually, about questions is that really good questions is deploying system two thinking. It's engaging that conscious part of the brain, the effortful part of the brain, in order to be able to stand back and take a view and find out what's really going on. So all of this stuff is at play. And there's a problem, isn't there? I know you believe you understand what you think I said, but I'm not sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant. And all of what we've been talking about before leads us into this. So often, the communication chasm, as I like to describe it. I think these words are those of Alan Greenspan, the former chair of the Federal Reserve in the United States. But here's the antidote, if you like. The objective, as I've described it here. This is Cardinal Newman, or I think he's now St. John Newman. He wrote, when people understand what each other mean, they see, for the most part, that controversy is superfluous or hopeless. Just think about that. If we really and truly understood each other where we're coming from, controversy is superfluous or hopeless. In a mediation not far from here, actually, several years ago, the lead negotiator leant over to his counterpart and said, just as important as the outcome is that we now understand where you are coming from. So understanding is critical to overcome so many of the cognitive, psychological, and other barriers there are to effective communication. And asking questions is key. So now we go to the technical part of the evening. And this is the work that I and others developed, particularly for the advocacy skills course, of which I spoke a while back with the Scottish Bar, and I've deployed in all the training and teaching I've done since, right up to and including Stormont very recently. A framework for asking questions. If we could all ask this particular question every time we ask a question, we would be world-class questioners. Why am I asking this question of this person at this time in this way? Maybe if there's nothing else you take away from the evening, maybe just take that thought away with you. The purpose of the question is clear. The content, the subject matter, you have got a clear understanding about. You've identified from whom you wish to elicit the information. You've got it in the timing of whatever the conversation may be or the event during the day. You've worked out when is the appropriate moment. And then in particular, you've thought about how to ask the question. And that's what I want to focus on in this next part of the presentation, the how. And that takes me back to forms of question. And I mentioned earlier on my awkwardness in discovering that I didn't really understand that there could be open and closed questions, and that they were different, and that their effect would be different. It took me to go to North Carolina to find this out. Open questions. Of this sort, Rudyard Kipling talked about the 6 honest serving men that taught him all he knew. What, how, why, when, where, and who. Very simple. Simple to say. I sometimes feel awkward presenting this, but we don't do it. We don't use these questions in the way that would be optimal and helpful to us in so much of what we do day in, day out. My good friend Sally Loudon, who used to be the chief executive of COSLA, called them in a course we were running conversation spanners. I don't think she meant to tighten up. I think she meant to loosen and to open up. Questions like these. What do you want? What do you need? These are 2 very different questions, by the way. What happened? What pressures are you under? What priorities do you have? What alternative courses of action might there be? What concerns do you have? What capacity is there to do such and such? What future might there be in this relationship? What are the implications if we don't do such and such? These are just the what questions. Why? Why do you need such and such? Why do you feel under that pressure? Then why are these your priorities rather than, well, how would you achieve such and such a different way of doing things? When would you do so? How do you feel? How do they feel? How will we achieve that in the future? And how would that affect you if we did X, Y, and Z? Just examples, folks, of simple, short, sharp, open questions of the Rudyard Kipling sort. Napoleon said this: why and how are words so important that they cannot too often be used? Now, if he said so, it's probably worth taking into account. And I talked before about getting below the surface, so here are some examples of questions which are designed to do just that, to get you below the immediately presenting symptoms, as it were. Do you really think about such and such? Note the italicized words here, just the one-word change. What's this really about? How specifically? Do you remember these were in the questions that we discussed at the very start of the evening? What else do you need to tell us? What in particular have I or we not understood? What else do we need to know? What specific advice have you been given, minister, senior civil servant, or whatever? How could you help us to address this? What one question, what one issue worries you most, Mr. President? Why are you so concerned, Miss Harris? Cheap shot, sorry. What could have been done differently? And so on. There are a whole raft of questions, all of these carefully formulated to achieve a particular purpose. Why are we asking this question of this person at this time in this way? And all of us could do this. It just takes a bit of thought, a bit of preparation, and a bit of practice, of course. In the world of scrutiny, to which I referred, and when I'm across in places like Stormont, and I'm off actually down to the House of Commons in a couple of weeks' time as well to do more of the same, it's these kind of questions. What are they, whoever they may be, actually offering to achieve? How will that be delivered in practice? Where will the funding come from specifically? When precisely will we see the results? What specific criteria are there for success? How will success be measured in detail? My concern is these are not questions that are being asked by public accounts committees, audit committees and finance committees in our several parliaments and assemblies, because the members, delightful though they are, don't have the skills very often to ask these sorts of questions, which is why this work and the work that I'm privileged to do in these places seems to be important. I just wanted to bring up the Glen Sannox and Carmack ferries, because I'm not sure, folks, that these questions have been asked or were asked when they could have been asked in Scotland. Years ago, there were questions that could and should have been asked about the procurement of these ferries and the way in which they were being built in the early years by Ferguson Marine. Seamal and Ferguson Marine fell out with disastrous consequences. And I don't think, and you can look at some of the public records about this, I don't think these sort of questions were, or even still, have been properly asked. But I speculate, perhaps somewhat provocatively. Anyway, time for a short pause. Some of you may find, I heard somebody saying something, it's a bit difficult. Yes, it's a bit difficult, actually, because you're having to engage the conscious part of your brain to do this, but that's the way in which we learn to do new things. So I'd simply suggest to you that you might want to practice these when opportunity arises and find out what the benefits are in doing so. I think they will be manifold. Anyway, let's move on, shall we? Here's a photograph of one Gary Richardson, I think, the Radio 4 sports broadcaster who retired recently, and in his last interview, he interviewed Andy Murray. And this is a question he put to Andy Murray. What a great question. What one question have I not yet asked you that would tell me something about you that I don't already know? There's a question to pack away in your kit bag, folks. When you don't know what to ask a question like this. And then my good friend Ken Cloak would say, think about questions that might help the other person as well. To help them from their perspective, perhaps to understand you or them or other situations. Here's a cracker from Ken in this book, Mediating Dangerously. He's got pages of great questions. Listen, a great one. You say to somebody, if this was the last conversation you were going to have with each other, what is the very last thing you want to say? So I deployed this in a mediation one day, a mediation involving a family business in which the father was in one room and the son was in the other room. They hadn't spoken for months. It was really difficult, really acrimonious. A lot of money involved, but also family issues arose. And I was trying to set up a meeting between the father and the son. And I said to the son in the privacy of his room, if this was the last conversation you're going to have with your dad, what's the very last thing you want to say to him? Well, the second word was off. So sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And then there are the more reflective questions, the questions you might pose of yourself. Now think about these questions in the context of that difficult situation, which I hope you made a note of earlier on. What was my role? What might I have done differently, and how might that have changed things? What do I now regret doing or not doing? This requires a bit of insight and honesty. What do I need to acknowledge in myself or about others? What might it be like to be the person I dislike or fear most? Here's a profound question. How might others see me? Not how might I want others to see me, but how might they really see me, and why might that be? What do I now need to say to others? And what have I or we learned just from this exercise? What do I need to change, and why? So again, I don't expect you to digest all of these thoughts, but it gives you a sense of the value that there can be in just asking these questions of yourself, perhaps sitting down with a piece of paper, and you might be surprised at what would come out and where that might take you as you address difficult situations. In preparing for mediations, I often send questionnaires to those who are taking part and invite them to do just this, to think about their own role in the situation which has arisen, and also about the situation of others. So here's I'm not quite sure how easily you can see that. It doesn't really matter. This is just a 2-pager which has gone out quite recently for mediation. I'm involved in quite soon. Just the last 3 questions on the first page. What do you think are the other person's main concerns? What are the pressures on the other person that you might need to acknowledge? What do you think that the other person really needs out of this over a page? What do you think the other person needs to hear from me, which will help to move things forward? And these are questions which people then are invited to consider prior to coming into the mediation context and meeting with the person with whom they have a dispute or the conflict. And it reminds me of Atticus Finch's words in To Kill a Mockingbird. You never really understand things from another person's point of view until you climb into his skin and walk around in it. And of course, these questions, I'm putting them forward in the context of preparation. These are also questions that can be asked and answered in the dynamic of a conversation, a negotiation, or a mediation. A further thought before moving to a few summaries and final reflections. They answered my questions with questions. That's a lyric from a great song entitled Questions by a group called Manfred Mann's Earth Band. Anybody remember Manfred Mann's Earth Band from 1975, 1970? Got a hand up there? Good. Excellent. Yeah. So rather than answering a question that's posed to you, pose a question back. It's a very interesting way of enabling others to do the work, of getting your point across. In fact, Jesus, when the disciples were talking about who he was, asked them the question, who do you say I am? Just very recently, I was in a negotiation with a colleague about an amount of money, and I think I'd made a proposal. My colleague came back with some points and said, basically, would you now make a further proposal? And I went back and said, well, no, what do you think? And that opened up a whole new conversation, and I learned all sorts of things that I would not otherwise have learned, and I just presented the solution, the answer to the question. Closed questions, very quickly. Closed questions take a number of forms. There are those that admit of a yes or a no answer. Did you tell them? Do you? Can you? Is it the case? Is there? Has there? These are questions to which the answer would be standard, either yes or no. There was no scope for change. Was there? Well, that's kind of heading towards a yes answer, isn't it? Or maybe a no answer. It's still an affirmation. And then this more leading question, you failed to notify the department, didn't you? That's an interesting question because it contains within it a contradiction. Did you not? And actually it's quite accusatorial, and the person to whom you address that question will know and sense that at a subconscious level, often used in cross-examination in courts. You told them there was no money available. A statement turned into a question by tone and inflection. So great for limiting the scope for answers, maybe to avoid prevarication if you're, again, in an adversarial setting. Helps you to make your point and keep control. But be careful, close questions carry all sorts of warnings. They'll reflect assumptions that you've made, may reflect the filter, the dirty filter we talked about earlier on, indicate you've prejudged, may limit the information that you get, determine the answer, lead to frustration, even lead to confrontation. Here's an interesting discussion about closed questions. Remember the referendum back in 2014? I mentioned this earlier on in the context of Collaborative Scotland. Closed question: should Scotland be an independent country? It's a closed question with an edge to it, isn't it? Heading just slightly in one direction because of the word independent. The Scottish Government actually wanted this question: do you agree that Scotland should be an independent country? Again, tilting psychologically towards a yes, perhaps rather than a no. I think I made a submission to the Electoral Reform Society along these lines. How about a proper open question? What should Scotland's constitutional status be? Perhaps with a bit of help with the two alternatives, tick the box. And to me, that is the properly neutral, open question which could and perhaps should have been posed. And I'll bet it would have produced a slightly different outcome. But that's not meant to be a political statement, it's just a provocation to have us thinking about the different formulations. Or perhaps we should be asking the deeper questions. What kind of country? What specific attributes? And then ask the means to the end question, which is about the constitutional arrangements. Leave that for you to think about. Content of questions, very briefly. I hope throughout this what's become apparent is that it's really effective and indeed efficient just to keep your questions short, 1 point per question. Try to avoid the gloss and the filler. When I work with the parliamentarians, I listen to them with all sorts of preamble and subtext and comments, and just keep it tight. Avoid compound or multiple questions. It's quite difficult to answer a multiple question, or, of course, easy to avoid answering it at all, if that's your objective. Try to avoid questions containing the answers. Keep it simple. Somebody said we should express rather than impress. My great friend Mike Jones QC became Lord Jones, died prematurely, had this wonderful phrase he used in our work in advocacy training. Every word, he said, should be carefully chosen for its task. And just a reminder, of course, it's not just the words. Research tells us how important non-verbal language is. Posture, gesture, facial expression, eye contact, tone, modulation, emphasis, pause, pace, all of these things are a critical component in communication and in the art of asking questions. The key thing is that the vocal and the visual, as I described them, support the verbal, but there's not an incongruity between the words you're saying and the way in which you present them. Because if there is that incongruity, people will pick up the signals from the visual and the vocal and disregard or be less helped by the verbal. A lot of stuff there. Let's move on from that and just remind ourselves of the importance of listening. Silence is golden. A hit for the tremolos, I heard. Thank you. Yeah. So important. Ask the question and listen to the answer. And listen right to the end of the answer. And listen then some more. What would he have said had the voice not dropped off or had somebody else not butted in? And then follow through and use the answers as the foundation for the next question, as you strip away the layers of the onion, as it were. Back to Stormont. Let me just see, looking at time, I'm very conscious of time, so I'm going to just take the next 2 or 3 very, very quickly. When I'm in Stormont, I ask a number of questions. I ask questions about purpose. These sorts of questions, I invite the politicians to ask themselves, why are we here? What are we trying to achieve? And ask them to prepare effectively beforehand in all sorts of different ways, identifying what their priorities are, identifying what they need to ask the questions about, what information they need, and what questions they're going to ask. That all falls into that work. But let me just move towards the end of this by just coming back to the big picture, if I may. That's Valencia last week. So we face existential risks, don't we, as a species. Again, my friend Ken Cloak says to us, there's no us and them, only us. Think about that for a moment. And ask yourself, well, Bill Urie says, in every conflict, it's never just us versus them, it's always all of us together. But ask ourselves this question: who is us? Today, perhaps of all days, who is us in the polarizing world, which may just become or have become more polarized? Yuri quotes Edward Markham in his book. He drew a circle that shut me out, heretic, rebel, a thing to flout, but love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle that took him in. Draw your circle, folks. Who do you need to take in? Who do we all need to take in if we're going to survive the existential risks that are posed to us as a species? Someone posed this question: how can we change their minds if we don't know what they're thinking? There we are. Putin, Netanyahu. What does the world look like through their eyes? What does it feel like to be them? Strategic empathy is what William Ury describes this as. Nelson Mandela had that. He spent years studying and understanding what it was that lay behind the Boers, the Voortrekker, and the whole movement towards apartheid, so that he could engage with them purposefully when freedom came. If you come out and you really ask why, beneath the slogans and the sound bites, you'll hear the person's story and you'll steal their wound. You'll steal their grief, you'll steal their rage, says Valet Kaur. I wrote an article not a wee while ago at the start of the war in Ukraine with questions for Putin. And again, I'm going to take these very quickly because I'm very, very conscious of time. But imagine you were in a room with Putin and you could ask questions like these. What happened to you way back when you were much younger? What experiences have shaped you as a person? What was it like growing up in your family? Who did you love? Who loved you? What are they thinking about you now? Does any of this matter to you? How easy is it for you to talk about any of this stuff? What do you really think about what's happening now, in your heart of hearts, and why? Who do you fear most? What do you fear losing? If you're stuck, how can you get yourself out of this? And can you ever contemplate these questions? If you can't, where does that leave you? Food for thought, taken very quickly and very briefly. I'm going to finish off by reminding us of your toolkit. Food for thought, chicken nuggets as well as golden nuggets. So, question from me to you is, what are you taking away from all this evening? And how will you use it? Perhaps in that difficult situation, which I hope you've been thinking about as I've been speaking. Roger Fisher talks about what we can do tomorrow. What one realistic step, folks, can you now take which will make a big difference and change things in your difficult situation or perhaps in the world today? World-class performance. It takes time, it takes practice, because you're seeking to create new habits. Excellence then, said Will Durant, is not an act, but a habit. Success is the sum of small efforts repeated day in, day out. Practice creates the master. It took me a lifetime. This is a journey. It's not something that will happen tomorrow or the next day. It's a journey of learning. Final thoughts then. This article appeared in the Scotsman just a few weeks ago on World Mental Health Day. And the author was describing the rituals that take place around football matches. And the author suggested that possibly one further ritual would be to turn to the person next to you in the crowd and ask, "How are you, mate?" And really listen to the answer. "How are you doing, mate, really?" And he said, "You might just save a life." So think about that. To whom might you pose the question, "How are you doing, really?" That's the final question that mediators are trained to ask. Actually, it's not that question, because that's a closed question, isn't it? It's this question: what else do I need to know? But that's me, finished. With this question to you: what else do you need to know? Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Wow. So I've got so many questions now, and I should say that Kamala Harris has just phoned Donald Trump and conceded and congratulated. Right, so you're right up to date, bang up to date now. Before we turn it over, because I would love, and you know you want to hear what everybody's made of what you've said, what question would you ask Kamala Harris? What question would you ask Donald Trump tonight?
Kamala Harris, what can you do and say which will help to protect democracy?
Okay, what about Trump? Good luck.
What can you do and say which really will heal your country, as you said you wish to do?
Not bad. Love you to have the opportunity to do that. Okay, it's over to you guys. Susan is, and so is Lindsay. There are pincer attacks here. Please don't be shy. This is a fantastic opportunity. There's somebody right in the front row. Can you tell us who you are? And then if you'd launch in there.
I'm Lorraine Simpson. It's scary to ask you a question because you're very good at them. How does tonight's experience compare with your dream of talking at the EICC?
No.
No guitar, John.
I know, no guitar. Do you know what? I'll need to watch it back, and then I'll be very self-critical of myself for putting far too many slides in and rushing towards the end. It's been a lovely experience, actually. It's just a real pleasure and a real privilege to be here. Yeah, it is. It doesn't compare with anything. It is what it is. It's been very enjoyable. Thank you.
Okay, we have somebody here as well. I don't know if there's anyone over there, if you can look out for people, but over here, first of all, tell us who you are if you want to. You don't have to use your full name. You can be anonymous, whatever. Can we get the microphone to this? Oh, sorry, this lady first and then this guy.
Right.
Yeah.
Confused. Hi. Thanks, John. My name's Julia. I work in the NHS, which I love. And great to hear about open and closed questions, because that's something that's just part of my daily practice. The thing that I struggle with that is around the question why, because I avoid using the question why because it can sometimes be quite seen as a bit aggressive, get people on the defensive, that type of thing. So my question is, when would the question why be appropriate to use?
No, thanks for raising that. Julie, was it? Yeah. And I nearly mentioned it, actually, but I was conscious of moving it at pace. So neuro-linguistic programming some years ago, I think, suggested to us that we shouldn't use the why question for the reasons that you've indicated. I think the why question is perfectly legitimate because it depends how it's asked. And again, I just mentioned tone and modulation of voice and so forth in passing. But the why question can be a why question, why? Or it can be a, why might that have happened? So I'm perfectly at ease with using why in any context in which it seems to be appropriate. But of course, you could substitute what reason, what are the reasons, what caused that to happen, if you feel uncomfortable, if you think that the other person might be uncomfortable. I think the key thing, Julie, is just to be thoughtful about it and be aware of the possible ramifications and repercussions and sensitivities of people that you're asking questions of. Does that help?
And I guess you're also looking at non-verbal things as well, how somebody's responding to that question and your tone and the silence as well. The importance of the silence, I love. Just waiting a beat or two. I think, I'll come to you in a second. Susan's gesturing like crazy up there, I think. But we've got somebody, so we haven't been over here yet. Let's do this, and then we'll come up to the back, and then we'll come to the front.
Thank you so much. My name's Tilly Robinson-Miles. I work in food policy. So definitely have been on the receiving end of some of those rather interesting questions from politicians. I've got a two-part question. The first part is that you mentioned listening briefly. I've done lots of training on active listening, and actually you shouldn't be thinking about the question you want to ask whilst you're listening to them, because that kind of negates the whole point of active listening. So I wondered if you could reflect on that. But also connected to that, I think we're increasingly asking questions not face-to-face, we're in other realms, whether that's on Teams or increasingly so through emails, social media, and how we can translate some of this learning into other platforms where we're not having the chance to have that non-verbal interaction in the same way.
Yeah.
Great questions.
Great question.
Two of them, yeah.
So I'm glad you asked the first one because, again, I skimmed over the slide which started off silence is golden. and then made the point that you should really listen to the answer, which is really your point. We tend not to listen to the answer because we are preparing the next question, or we are thinking about our rebuttal because we often feel that we're in an adversarial setting, or we're thinking about whether we left the washing machine on or done the shopping or whatever it might be. So it's a real self-discipline thing. It's about being present in the moment and giving the other person the dignity and the courtesy of your full attention, and recognizing that that may mean that you take a microsecond or a few microseconds more to respond or formulate your next question, and that's absolutely fine. So that's the first thing, using the silence in that way. So far as the second is concerned, I've had a few meetings recently in which we've come up with the theme, room, not Zoom, because people are really getting tired of online Teams and Zoom meetings, and actually they are becoming, for some people, rapidly counterproductive and suboptimal. However, I think you can translate all of this stuff into that environment. So I was somebody who was completely opposed to the use of online facilities for mediation before the pandemic, would not have considered it, but was forced to do so, and found actually that you can do this stuff online perfectly, adequately, and indeed satisfactorily, but you have to work hard at it. And I mentioned earlier on, being very conscious of your formulation and consideration of questions and responses and so forth. So I think it just accentuates the importance of being mindful about the form and content of questions. And also with writing. You're absolutely right. Email and text, we do things instantaneously. We expect an instantaneous response. Pause. Think about what you're writing. Think about asking questions even in your text, certainly in your email, and what the formulation of that question might be, rather than just a slapdash answer straight off, which is often what we do and often what's expected. I think I just come back to say you can be really thoughtful about this stuff. You can, I think, apply it across all media or mediums.
That answer your questions? I hope it did. Somebody up the back, and then we're coming to the front because, yeah. Okay, Susan, where are you? You've got a microphone. You've got somebody there, yes. Who are you? I can't even see you. Hello.
Okay, yes, thank you. My name is Mercy Cherono. I'm from Stay City Apart Hotels, and I have a question about difficult questions. So thank you, John and Carla, for this. One of the first things you said was if you ask proper questions, you'll get better answers. So you have to often ask difficult questions. How do you make those difficult questions and get best responses and not defensive responses or shortcut responses? So how do you ensure you get best responses from difficult questions?
You can't ensure, there's no guarantee, cast iron guarantee. This is about seeking to maximize the opportunity or optimize the opportunity of getting a better response. So that's the first thing. I think that context is everything. So I don't think I would start a difficult meeting and say, imagine I was mediating and Claire was one of the parties. I wouldn't immediately go into the room and ask those difficult questions. What I would do is seek to build rapport with Claire, ask her about what's important to her, maybe about how she got here, about her family, and seek to build up, I hope, an element of trust and confidence between us. And then perhaps explain that I was going to ask some questions which are not designed to be aggressive or adversarial or provocative, but designed to help me to understand better where Claire's coming from or what it is that she's experienced, and gently place it into context. We come back to tone, of course, again, and how we sit, facial expression, arms folded or legs crossed or more open. All of this stuff comes into play. I have a little, what would I call it, a mnemonic or an acrostic, AARREE. And let me just offer this to you. It's a wonderful little tool to help you to set context. And that's to acknowledge where somebody is coming from, accept their view of the world, recognize the impact on them of what has happened, reassure them that you're here to help and to try to find a way forward, engage them, and then explain what it is that you're going to do, perhaps that you're going to ask some difficult questions or how you see things from your perspective. And again, that sounds very conceptual and very theoretical, but done with skill and thought, it can be really helpful to create the environment which then helps you and I to ask those difficult questions and hopefully achieve better answers as a result.
I was just thinking when you're saying all that, and we are coming to you, sir, definitely in a second. Susan's going to get the microphone over to you. About you, when you started out doing mediation, you said you had all your, sort of mind map of things. Is it useful for people that aren't used to thinking of asking questions in different ways, like Mercy, to have some sort of, prompts there to remind them to ask open questions and the way to phrase it? Yeah,
I think so. One of the things I wanted to do tonight, I was counselled by my daughter and my wife that this would be environmentally unfriendly, was to produce little cards for you all to take away with little suggestions. But maybe you could create the cards for yourself. And yes, it certainly worked for me. Depends, of course, how you work. But we often go into meetings with notepads, don't we, in front of us with the topics, the issues that we want to discuss. Why not have a pad that has just some of these open questions in front of you? And the more you do that, the more you then develop the habit, and it becomes natural. And after a period of time, certainly as I've found, you don't need them anymore because it's become part of your natural skill set. But yes, every tool that can help you to improve your performance, as it were, Claire, makes sense.
Yep, good one. Right, we're getting to you now, sir. Hello, who are you?
Hello, my name's Tom Ward. Thank you very much for your talk. My question is this. My father used to be a criminal barrister, and I'm sure that he sometimes used to ask questions to which he already knew the answer. He wasn't seeking information. He just wanted to find out what it was you were going to say in answer to his question. Do you think this technique has any wider applicability, or should it just be reserved for criminal barristers?
Yeah. Yes. And I should be very clear, actually, folks. I'm throwing out suggestions here which you need to then modify and use thoughtfully in the circumstances in which you find yourself. I mean, Tom, they often say, particularly of those appearing in a courtroom, that you should never ask a question unless you know what the answer is. I remember that the purpose of the courtroom lawyer is not to elicit new information for the first time, but to be a conduit, if you like, for information to go from this person here, the witness, to that person or people, the judge or the jury over there. And so it's a quite different function where knowing what the answer is often essential. In fact, asking a question to which you don't know the answer can be fatal.
I think John Humphreys of the Today programme also said that. He said, you should never ask a question you don't know the answer to. I made a career out of asking questions that I had no idea what the answer was. So I think you can be curious as well.
Yeah, and I think that takes us to the why am I asking this question? If it's down to purpose, what's the purpose of the question? If you're genuinely looking to get new information, that's fine. But if your purpose is to make sure that you're a conduit to get this information to that person there, then it's a different approach that you would take.
Absolutely. Okay, who have we got next? Oh, sorry, we're going to go over there and then we'll come back. Right.
I'm Chris Brown. I'm a psychotherapist. You talk about the open and closed question, but there is a third way, which I think we as psychotherapists use, and it's around phenomenological exploration. And it's trying to get to the truth of the client's experience, or at least a shared understanding between the client and therapist about what their understanding is. And it's saying things like, tell me more about that. Describe that to me in another way, or describe that to me in more detail. Yeah. So it's not a closed question, or certainly not an open, but it allows more exploration of the issue.
Arguably, it's not a question at all. It's actually a command.
Ooh.
Describe, but it doesn't have the connotation of command because of the way in which you ask the question, the psychotherapeutic environment in which the question is posed. I think I deleted the slide which had tell me, describe and explain. So I've reduced what I've said tonight to maybe greater simplicity than is helpful, but you're absolutely right. There are oodles of other ways of asking questions. In a sense, starting with the open and closed gives us the foundation blocks upon which you can then build. But often even a describe or explain question will be followed by what, how, when, where, depending upon the context and the circumstance.
Great insight as well. I think there were more questioners up the back, were there? Yep, there. And then I'll try and get to as many as possible. Yep.
I'm David Gibson, and my question is, John, how often does a response to a question you get help shape the rest of that specific meeting that you're in, so that the meeting ends up going in a direction you weren't expecting?
I think one would have to be open to that all the time, Tom, and with every question. Unless you're in a courtroom and your job is to make sure that only information which you are carefully controlling and managing gets to the audience, which is not you, but the decision maker. But the purpose of many of the particularly open questions that I was suggesting today is to elicit information which, as Claire has said, would be new information. And again, you then use the answers to these questions to generate the next question. And it may take you into all sorts of different areas. I mean, my work as a mediator is so different in many ways to being an advocate. Although the technical skills are the same, my work as a mediator requires me to explore new things, and often to help people to find things that they themselves haven't thought about or been aware of before. And so, yes, in a meeting, whatever the context may be, we may very well journey down all sorts of paths. And of course, that could then, I suppose, be unmanageable and uncontrollable. So you have to think then about context, timing, purpose, and so forth and so on. Does that help? Yeah.
Okay, we have another question down the front, then we'll come back up the back. I'll zigzag as much as possible. I don't think we've got an incredible amount of time, but we will have another 10, 15 minutes. So, okay, where were we?
Hiya.
Who's got it? Who's got the mic? Right, hello.
Hi, my name's Shan Saba. I've got a question about active listening. It kind of follows on from there. With politicians who can't answer the question, what do you do to get the core of what you're trying to get to?
I'm probably never in that position, actually. So let me give you a theoretical response to that. If I, and Claire may have done this, was going into a difficult interview, say, with a politician who I knew might be a bit slippery or evasive, I might seek to set some ground rules. In fact, I do say this to chairs of parliamentary committees at the outset, saying to the witness, we're going to ask you some questions, and we'll try to keep these questions short and concise, and we would ask you, please, to answer the question. And if you don't answer the question, we'll ask the question again. And if you don't answer the... Well, actually, Mr. Politician, can I ask you just to affirm that you will be prepared to answer the questions that we ask? Quite difficult for a politician to say no. So if the politician has agreed conceptually to that general protocol of answering the questions, I suppose if the politician then doesn't answer the question, you can then say, now, Mr. Politician, the question was X. Earlier, you agreed to answer our questions. I'm going to answer the question again. And at the very least, you then, I suppose, expose the politician for his or her failure to respond to the question. So that takes a bit of, again, forethought. It's about setting the context, setting the ground rules, as it were, for the interview or the conversation, and be able then to use these at a later point if you need to do so. I don't know, Claire, do you have any thoughts about that?
It's interesting because if you're doing a broadcast interview, you've got 3 or 4 minutes maybe to make an impact and get something out of a politician. So people will say, it was rude, you're cutting across, or you keep jabbing them, keep asking the same question. I think the genius of Michelle Hussain on the Today programme is she sounds so charming and so controlled, but persistent. She will doggedly keep asking the question. She'll reframe the question. She'll say, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to ask you that again. I think there are ways to do it without becoming hectoring, because that's a problem. And also sometimes when you've got that tiny little gate of opportunity for 2 or 3 minutes, you know that most politicians are going to filibuster. They're going to try and outrun you by just wanging on for 3 or 4 minutes, using up all the time, knowing that you're never going to be able to pin them. But yeah, very frustrating for the interviewer, and the interviewees are getting very adept at dragging things out and just repeating their mantras all the time. But I do think we, the public, listeners, viewers, are all savvy to that now, and it's not good enough, so they'll have to do better.
I remember Melvin Bragg doing a documentary on the art of asking questions. I've just remembered it now, and he said over the piece, the aggressive form of question tends not to work. So again, that illustration you've just given there of the very carefully formulated, courteous, but very clear, precise, reframed if necessary and repeated if necessary, and have the confidence to do so is the way to go about it.
Absolutely, and getting that confidence requires practice, doesn't it?
Exactly.
And you will fail, and it will be a mess sometimes, but keep going with it. So I think we've got more questions. Who's in the... Should we... Right, okay, whoever's got the mic.
Yeah, I'm Sami Mwara. I was really interested in the point about responding to a question with a question. And I wondered if you could maybe elaborate a little bit on that and how you could do that without coming across as evasive or even cunning.
So how do you think
Touché.
that I should answer that question?
I don't know, that's why I asked the question.
If I'd asked the question of, if I asked that question of you, thinking about what I've said this evening, what do you think?
Nope, microphone back, hold on.
So I suppose what I'm doing is I'm trying to illustrate. So remind me, just having done that, I've now forgotten what the question was. Say the
question with a question.
Yeah.
Answering a question.
Yeah, how do you ask a question in response to a question?
Yeah.
Without coming across as evasive or cunning?
You've just done it.
Yeah.
I'll tell you why. Because you take a beat or two and you go, okay, so you're not aggressive, you're kind of pacing it and you're looking like this is cogitating in your brain and you're giving people credit for asking you a good question and making you think. So that response to me sums up that you can do it in a very non-confrontational way, that you are actually thinking about.
Yeah. What do you think?
There we go. We'll go to another question. One at the back. Sorry. Have you got a microphone or something on? Great news. Hi.
Thank you for an excellent presentation, John. My name's also John. And my question is, what specifically motivates you to do gigs like this one?
I like the word specifically.
Yeah.
Because I was asked, John, and genuinely I hope it's a privilege to share what I think I've picked up and learned over the years in this way.
Okay, God, there's so many hands going up. Right, who are we next?
Hi, my name is Eleonora, and I was quite interested in the graphic that you showed that it's not just about the question, but the way you ask the question, so the visual and the vocal. And sometimes when you go and ask question, you might have many different emotions. So how do you train yourself to be like right for the question that you ask?
Yeah. How do you train yourself? Well, I'm just doing it now, I suppose. First of all, you might not necessarily need to always be completely composed because it may be important and relevant for you to show that you are emotional, angry, excited in some way or other. So that's all right. I think just draw breath. Literally and metaphorically plant your feet in the ground. Pause. And the pause is really, I took a slide out, the power of the pause. Pausing to formulate your next question, your next thought, to consider what's just been said, to be mindful, re-engage system 2 thinking rather than system 1, if that's the setting. Does that help? A wee bit. Yeah.
There's somebody here, sorry, right.
Thanks. My name's Titus, I'm an educator, and I was very stimulated by your talk. And the thing is, children are full of questions when they're small, but quite quickly, particularly when they go to school, they learn how to conform and to give the answers to questions that other people put them. So how do we get parents and schools to teach children to ask good questions?
Well, a great question, Titus. I don't know the answer to that question. I'm tempted to ask you what you think as an educator.
Well, it needs to be put into the curriculum. It needs to be upfront, and also we need to support parents in encouraging their children to ask questions and helping them to find out.
And you know what? I hope this doesn't sound too old fogyish, but maybe we need to put these things away and actually listen to the questions that children are asking, answer them, and then ask them some questions too.
Yeah. Good points. Next question, over here. Oh, right, one here and one there. Okay, first of all, here we have him first, Susan.
Hello, I'm Catherine Bruce. Hi, John.
Hi, Catherine. Hi.
I'm a consultant and mediator. So when you're dealing with someone where every fiber in your body kind of revolts against their actions, you've named, potentially a few people. Are there any techniques that you use to bring yourself in that mindset to really ask questions, to try and understand their point of view?
I think if you feel so revolted by somebody that you feel unable to be objective or dispassionate, you should perhaps remove yourself from the situation. I think you should be very mindful of that. But I think as life has gone on for me, and I think about people like Putin, which is why I did that little bit of play about Putin and Trump, they're people just like us. They're all Jock Tamson's bairns, to use a Scottish expression. And so I think I would be cautious about being put off by somebody's behaviour, their attitudes, their actions, which are if you like, the presentation of who they are. But very often, you'll know this as much as I do, Catherine, underneath it, people are different. Under the masks. The masks, often the angrier the mask, the more lacking in self-esteem people are. So I think the quest, maybe as one gets older, is to be more and more curious, more and more thoughtful, more and more respectful, and try to gain a deeper understanding of why maybe I feel the way I do towards somebody, and maybe why they behave in the way that they do.
I think there were some people over here. Yeah.
Thank you both. My name is Paul. In a way, it's a continuation of the last question, because in a mediation situation, which seems absolutely fascinating, I keep on wanting to ask you really what happened between that son and father, but that's probably too long and you might give too much away. But what happens, because there's never an equal power in most situations. Someone has the advantage and someone has a disadvantage. Someone might be more intelligent, more charismatic, might be richer, might be wealthier. So I suppose my question is, neutrality there doesn't really necessarily mean being fair. So how do you approach that when there is a big difference in the power relationship between people?
That's a huge topic, and it's really too much to try and cope with. But very, very shortly, I wouldn't use the word neutral, because I think it's very difficult to claim to be neutral. I think one tries to be impartial. And I think also one has to challenge the presumption of power imbalances, that somebody who's wealthier or more knowledgeable in some way or other is more powerful than somebody who may be partly less wealthy and less knowledgeable. It's often the case that the perception of power is different depending upon, think about the cheese, the perspective that you have. And often the person who might be perceived to be apparently weakest actually has much more power than you, they, or the others think. And the person who appears strong may be much more vulnerable than you, they, or others may think. So I think challenge the assumptions that you make. And one of the great beauties of the role of mediator is that we can do these things and we can, if not achieve equality, I think that's but a degree of, you used the word, fairness and parity, and help in some way to ensure that these issues about power are addressed, perhaps explored, and better understood. And there's so much more to that than that short answer.
Great question. Big subject. Maybe room for one more or two more. Very, very quickly. Right. Okay. Back.
Seeing as this is the last question, I'm Michael. What's the one question we haven't asked you yet that we think you should
Since it's you, Michael, my son.
Oh, God, right.
It's who's paying for dinner tonight?
Maybe we've got room for one more. Who's wanting to do that? Let's see. Oh, there's somebody waving their arm over here. Let's do that. Here comes Susan. She's running about. So is Lindsay. Sorry,
Thank you,
guys.
Susan. My name is Alice. I'm just curious to know why in the presentations the quotations and references are mostly from male figures. And are there no female voices?
Yes. Why is that?
That's a very, very good question. I can't answer other than to say that's what I discovered. And it may very well be, Alice, that in my searching and discovery, I have been affected by unconscious bias. And I own that and accept that and apologise unreservedly for that. And I will look for more quotations from female voices to add to those from male voices. Thank you for raising that.
Very good point. Listen, what an amazing session that's been. I learned so much. It was wonderful hearing you interact. The audience asked brilliant questions. I want to say a big thank you to you guys for coming here tonight and spending time, but especially to you, because it's been absolutely instructional. Loved every minute of it, and I hope you'll do something like this again. But on behalf of everyone here, thank you very much, Mr. Sturrock. Now.
Can I ask Claire one question?
Oh, aye.
Claire, given all that you knew, what nugget, you already know, what nugget will you take away from this evening?
I've got too many. I think that's the problem, because you went through so many things. I would like... Oh, that's the point I want to ask you. I've just turned that back. Are you going to make these available? You said you were at the beginning, because I would like to go through this in time and in my own space to really digest it. I mean, there's so many things I want to ask you, so many great spin-off questions that people have asked in here as well.
Well, thank you. I think Susan will tell us that the recording will be available, and I will make available not all the slides, because there's far too many, but the best of the slides.
Fantastic.
In a truncated form that you can all then make use of in any way that you wish.
How will they get that? How will they...
That'll come, I think, through David.
Okay, she's going to explain that. So listen, I'm just going to hand over... Well, say thank you again.
Thanks to Claire. Thanks to Claire.
Thank you. So... Right, I'm going to hand to Susan now.
Thank you. Thank you very much. What a fascinating evening. I'm so sorry to the people that we didn't manage to get around to questions. And hopefully John will be around for a few minutes afterwards, so do nobble him afterwards if you've got a burning question still to ask. It was a fascinating evening, and I learnt a lot, but it did make me reflect on what brought us here tonight, and that was... both of you, I asked closed questions of to, would you do this? And I also thinking of Tom, who I asked to move to the front row and then ask it. You said, I have a big role of closed questions in my life, mainly to persuade people to do things. And there are a number of you in the audience that are a part of plans we're hatching for the future, but also to the EICC, who we asked to host, and they were absolutely fantastic partners to work with. It is a joy to partner with you, and I'm really honoured that you choose the David Hume Institute to work with. Without such generous partners giving their time both to speak and to host, physically and in person, Claire, we just wouldn't be able to put these events together. And John, this event tonight came out of the Baroness Ashton event, which ended with a question, and then what? And then John was the, and then what, out of that conversation. Claire, I happened to sit next to her at dinner, and she asked me loads of questions about the economy, and I said, let's learn together, so you're all part of the journey. And I think asking questions has a really important role to play in the kind of economy we want to see. So that's why the journey on talking about questioning is connected to the work we've done on trust previously. So I do hope you've enjoyed this evening. We have got a QR code, so please do scan that and give us your feedback. Let us know what you think. How can we learn and improve the future? Let us know the questions we maybe didn't ask and get to. We are a small charity. We can only continue to bring these events as a result of donations, both in terms of people's time and in terms of money. So please do donate if you're able. It would be a great help. That's the question I least like asking, if I'm honest. Asking for the money is the hard bit. Our next event will be on Monday the 25th, and it's a breakfast briefing. So if you're in Edinburgh and want a free bacon roll, please do join us for that. It's the Understanding Scotland Economy Tracker, our quarterly survey that we do. Regular attendees will know all our events are free and open to everyone as part of our commitment to diversity of thought. But now, unfortunately, it's time to draw the event to a close. So I'd like to give thanks to all of you, to the wonderful staff at the EICC, and to John and Claire. Thank you very much, everyone.